Pediatric heart transplant with plenty of digressions about Scottish nationalism, urban planning, raising children, and a few other things. You better get all of those in.
Yeah. I want to thank, first of all, the organizers of this for making me the only thing between 30 of my colleagues and lunch. And I am delighted to be back at Sabbatical. I mean, it's just so wonderful to be back. So my sabbatical started with my great course. And we all have great courses, but like this was actually a great course. Like from the great courses, it was published in August. Democracy in its alternatives. While I was working on this, democracy was in decay. I was watching it happen. The 2020 elections, January 6th, like as I'm writing this up. And so what started as a course on comparative government changed into really being a study on democratic decay. Watching it in live time and democratic dysfunction. And so when we talk about our research informing how we teach, like I'm going to teach comparative government totally different from now on as a result of this. And it's very much going to be focused on democracy and its alternatives, right? Like showing students what kind of democracy is really bad at doing, not because I hate democracy or because I like it, but because if they want to defend it, they ought to understand why the alternatives are so attractive to so many people. So speaking of democratic dysfunction, I also delved into my job as a city councilman, right? I had the time to do that, and that too provided me with all kinds of experiences to think about how I would use what I learned on city council, or what I was learning on city council by spending time on it during sabbatical in my classes. And I'm sort of joking about the democratic dysfunction, but I'm sort of not. I noticed all these ways while doing stuff on urban development and doing stuff with the city council that democracy is just kind of really good at the 4-year plan and really bad at the 40-year plan, right? Because of election cycles, right? So think about something like traffic, which we all hate. Right? This is the dilemma of traffic. What do? Well, the obvious solution if you have too much traffic, which we're going to have if every house has 2 cars, right? The obvious thing to do, the very obvious solution is you just expand the road, right? Then the traffic gets spread out and you would have less traffic congestion. Sort of, right? Except the problem is that developers are smart. And everybody wants to live in a neighborhood that doesn't have traffic, right? So they build more houses, and guess what? The traffic returns. We're back to where we started, except for we're worse off than when we started because we have the same amount of traffic that reached its equilibrium, but we have more of it, right? So it was a realization that demand has a tendency to meet supply, right? We supply those roads, and the demand is going to go there to fill it. But also the ways in which urban sprawl is kind of a real example of a democratic discontent, something that democracies are really bad at. Urban sprawl, which nobody wants, is the product of hundreds of incremental decisions that everybody wants, right? And that's the kind of thing that democracies just are not very good. They're good at other things, right? But they're really bad at that. We all want less traffic, so we all want to expand the roads. We all want more housing because that's going to increase our tax base, right? I've done that. I voted for that in the city council. Great, I'll get reelected. I'm unopposed anyway, so you don't have a choice. But but this is the result of hundreds of incremental decisions that we want, leading to a result that nobody wants. So much for that. Also, I should say, I'm sitting here under the gaze of Nick and Joyce and Christy, right? And like 3 economists in the first 2 years. So like, they don't care about this, but just so you know, I know. Like, it is quantity demand, right? And so, all right, so then we went to Scotland. Christy, as you know, is doing, she's doing research on the woolens industry and stuff like that. So we went to Scotland. She had, it was brilliantly planned, 2 conferences separated by about a month and a half, both in Scotland. So of course you don't go and come back, you go to Scotland. Well, the day we arrived in Glasgow, was a Tuesday. It was the morning that the Queen met Liz Truss. We were essentially in the UK for longer than Truss was Prime Minister. But also, this was on a Tuesday. What happened on Thursday of that week? This is the Queen's last public appearance because on Thursday she dies. And so we were in the UK to watch that. In a pub, we watched the funeral, a pub in Staines, West Side. You know, Ali G? Right, West Side? Right, we were in Staines in a pub watching the funeral. But we were there to watch this whole thing unfold. It was fascinating. It also was, good family time. We got to go to the north. Pretty cool. The actual Penny Lane. Stuff like that. We then went. Christie's second conference was in the Shetland Islands, which are part of Scotland, but they're way up there. I love how the map makes it look like they're right there, because they are not. They are way out there. They're actually closer to Norway than to Scotland. And really, being there while Christie was at a conference, being on this remote North Atlantic, freezing as heck island with a 2.5-year-old was 10 days. So that was great. But in writing my great course, I did, I'll admit, right, I was not pulling my weight as I would like to when it comes to childcare and stuff like that, right? You don't call it babysitting if you're the dad, but childcare, right? So that Christie was working on her book and her book revision. So I really was doing that, and it was actually a pleasure. I mean, this is funny, but it was a pleasure. All right. But I did get time to return to my own research, which has been for a while now on the politics of pediatric heart transplant. Economics is the study of how scarce resources are allocated. Politics is about the provision of public goods. Organs are scarce resources. The organ transplant system is all about how we allocate those goods. So it's been something I'm interested in for a while now. I'm a liberal arts guy. My brother is a liberal arts guy and a doctor, right? So we've done this research together. So I got a visiting professorship at the Lucile Packard Children's Hospital. If you've ever bought a Hewlett Packard device, I thank you. Thanks also to the cost faculty development and Stanford medicine for making this possible. But I was working with a team where we're trying to actually make the organ, especially the pediatric heart transplant system more efficient. And what I bring to this, I guess, is that it really is a study of political economy. I've done this research already. The article that I've written with the title of which I am still most proud is The Boy in the Bubble and the Baby with the Berlin Heart. The Berlin heart is it's essentially an artificial heart that you can hook a patient up to while they're on the waiting list. But there are problems with it. The problem is that it works too well. Ask me about that later. Anyway, also you can ask me why hearts and why pediatric. Answers to that too, but not time for that. Okay, so it did get me thinking about the causes of the shortage in organs. And, what I bring to the table, right, is that I think I can look at this like a political economist. So let's size it up to supply and demand. There's sort of this romanticized notion, and I don't want to belittle it, but this romanticized notion that if you want to solve the organ shortage, the way to do that is to get more people to sign up as donors. That's obvious, that's great. I sure as heck don't want to discourage anybody from that. If it's consistent with your values or whatever, I hope you'll sign up as an organ donor. But between us, it's numerically insignificant. It will not make a difference. The life I hope for all of you and everybody I love is that you'll live long enough that your heart won't be valuable as a donated organ. Right? 80-year-old hearts don't get donated. right? The hearts that get donated are trauma victims, right? People who die at my age or younger from something that wasn't related to the heart, where the heart can then be donated. So you get 1,000 new heart donors, or organ donors. That doesn't mean you're going to get 1,000 new hearts. You might get a couple at best. That's worse. It depends, how you look at it, right? Not where the money is in terms of making the organ transplant system more efficient. It's also worth saying that the shortage is caused by some things that are really good. It's a good problem to have. One reason for the shortage is because doctors are much, much better at keeping people alive while they're on the waiting list. If people stay on the waiting list longer, if waitlist mortality goes down, but the number of donated organs stays the same, there's going to be a longer line. That's just how it works. Same thing with automobile safety, right? Seatbelt. Let's think about the last generation. Think about our generation, right? I used to drive around in the front seat of passenger seat of the car without a seatbelt, or maybe with a lap belt. Right? That was great for pediatric heart donation, right? But we all have a different system now with seat belts and laws that require that we wear them, and airbags, and the child restraint industrial complex, which is just like nuts. So there you go. So all these things are good for automobile safety, but they're total killers from the perspective of pediatric organ donation. Look at the bright side. As a country, we are entirely unlikely to do anything about gun violence, though. So that is helpful. But I realized that for a transaction to happen, you need somebody willing to supply it, and you need somebody who wants it, but you also need the transaction. And also, the economists don't care about this. Sometimes there's something called a transaction cost, but they just assume that away. But if you actually pay attention to it, right, you realize this is the statistic that hit me. 50% of donated hearts go unallocated. They end up in the trash, essentially, right? And so if you really want to solve the shortage, maybe, think about that for a second, right? So to me, the question was why? Right? Why does that occur? And some of it is distance and kind of practical things like that. Some of it is political. Like the fact that no doctor in the history of the world has ever been sued for not doing an organ transplant. Right? So I'm a doctor, I am a doctor, but not the real kind. But you're a doctor with a patient, and an organ becomes available, but it's slightly imperfect. It's slightly incompatible. It has some problem with it. Do I want to take that heart from my baby? The classic example, the new example, is COVID. Somebody dies of COVID, but their heart is fine. We all know that kids really, of anybody, do pretty well with COVID. They're unlikely to suffer complications. Most kids on the organ transplant waiting list would take a new heart even if it came with COVID. But do you want to be the doctor who said yes to that process? I don't, Molly, it's the thing you say about saying everything you say as if it's going to be repeated to you in a courtroom?
Yes.
Is that?
Yeah, Dan's like nobody's watching email like it'll be read aloud in the courtroom.
Yeah, so can you imagine, yes, Your Honor, I did give that organ to this patient and things went south. And did you know it had COVID? Yeah, I just didn't think it would matter. I mean, it's not going to play well. Doctors routinely, maybe people routinely, make the perfect the enemy of the good. Same thing with what I call a ratings fetish among organ transplant programs. Just like colleges all want more and more applicants because then your percentage, is better, right? The percentage accepted makes them look more exclusive. It's the same but opposite for transplant programs. The higher percentage of your transplants that then work and survive, the better, right? So you want a perfect heart. You don't want the slightly incompatible heart, even if it would probably be okay, right? Because it pushes. So you're actually punished for, right? So doctors are people, right? And they make these decisions. Now here is really the problem. There's also this way in which demand rises to meet supply. It's not urban sprawl being a democratic discontent, it's the organ transplant system. A doctor has a decision when she or he has a patient who has a heart that might be solved with a heart transplant that might also be solved with alternative therapies. And it's hard to prove this, but what I'm working on now is sort of looking at the sort of ways in which if the supply goes up, it might just be that doctors are more likely to list patients instead of, finding alternative routes. And so, could you solve this? Yes. Could a democracy solve this? I'm not sure. Yeah. All right, go on. It's lunchtime. If you really want to just go, that's like fine. You have my phone number.
Have you proposed any ways to ameliorate?
Well, ways to ameliorate would maybe come if I could prove that this is the case. The problem is you can't. Maybe you can. But this is our sort of current roadblock. Is we know that this is happening. Like shit, we know this is happening, but we don't know that this is happening, right? Like we don't have scientific proof. We can't. Like, how do we know? Like what, a doctor's going to admit, yeah, I didn't transplant that because it wasn't perfect, but it probably would have worked, and then the patient died on the waiting list. Nobody's going to admit to this, and I don't mean that's because anybody's being bad intentioned. I think they're even unaware of it. Like, it's in your nature, if you love your patient, to be extra careful. I'm like that as a parent, right? Like when thank God I have healthy kids. You're calm. This is like your biggest tantrum ever. My other advice is like being an old parent. It's kind of great. When I was young, I was physically in shape for this, but I would have been a normal friend. Being an adult parent, but I have my back aches. I need a doctor. Yeah, Eric.